A man in a white t-shirt walked into a bank he owned. Nobody knew that yet. The marble floor, the brushed silver logo. Cool air that said money without saying it, and behind the counter, a drawer, locked, with his card inside it. He didn't move. They told him to leave. Then they put hands on him. Then they announced over the speakers, loud enough for every person in that lobby to hear, that he was a fraud. He still didn't move, because somewhere outside, through the front glass, a 67-year-old woman was sitting on a bench, holding a savings book. Not sure if she was allowed to come in. She had been waiting a long time, so had he. The photograph was small, smaller than he remembered. James Caldwell held it between two fingers, careful, like it might dissolve if he pressed too hard, and looked at the woman standing in front of a bank door in Atlanta. September 1987, his mother, Eleanor Caldwell, 37 years old, wearing her good coat, the blue one she saved for important days. She was not inside the bank, she was outside it, standing on the sidewalk with her purse held tight against her body and an expression on her face that James had studied for 30 years and still couldn't fully name. Anger. Not quite. Something older than anger, something that had been living in her body so long it had stopped making noise. They told her the account needed more verification. She waited 4 hours. Then she walked home. James set the photograph down on the kitchen counter. To his coffee, his plain white mug, his ordinary Thursday morning in September 2024. He was 45 years old. He owned 23 buildings in this city, and he was about to put on a white t-shirt and a pair of faded jeans and walk into one of them. The one he built, the one that was supposed to mean something, because he needed to know if it still did. 3 weeks ago, a woman named Dorothy Wills had posted something on Reddit that he had not been able to stop reading. 67 years old, silver hair, said she'd gone to the Apex branch on 5th Avenue to withdraw her pension check. Said they asked her to prove the account was hers. Said she waited, and eventually just left. Same account she'd held for 11 years. Same branch, his branch. James folded the photograph. It hit his front, called an Uber. Not the car service Diana usually arranged, just a regular Uber, a driver named Greg who asked if I was in finance and seemed satisfied when James said yes and didn't push further. Side the window, Seattle moved past, gray and green and unhurried. James looked at his reflection in the glass. White t-shirt. Jeans, sneakers. 45 years old and looking, as his mother used to say, like somebody's son. Somebody ordinary, somebody unremarkable. Was the point. 1996, Baltimore. James was 17 years old, his first time walking into a bank alone. He had scholarship check for $800, the first scholarship he'd ever won. He had ironed his shirt that morning, practiced what to say, written the account number on a piece of paper and folded it carefully into his pocket because he didn't want fumble. Teller looked at the check, then looked at him, then looked at the check again. Is this? Yes, ma'am. You earned this. Yes, ma'am, she asked 3 more times. Different phrasing each time, but the same wall underneath. A wall made of words instead of bricks, but a wall is a wall regardless of what it's made from. The money. He walked out, and for 3 blocks he felt like he'd done something wrong. He couldn't name what. Felt it, that low, persistent hum, the specific exhaustion that comes not from doing anything bad, but from having to prove over and over that you haven't. He was 17. He didn't have language for it yet. By 28, he had plenty of language, and a company, and a loan meeting at a downtown bank for $2 million. He wore a good suit that time, pressed. Tie straight. Shoes shined the way his grandmother had taught him. If your shoes are right, the rest follows. The loan officer asked 3 times who he was representing. Myself, James said each time. This is my company. They made him wait 90 minutes. Additional verification, they said. No further explanation. He got the loan, went home, loosened his tie, sat at his kitchen table. Decided that the next institution he walked into, he would not be walking in as someone who needed to be tolerated. He would be walking in as the man who built it. Apex Financial Group, founded 2012, 12 years of building something he believed in. An institution where nobody would sit in a plastic chair for 4 hours proving they were who they said they were. Was the whole idea. He needed to know if it was still true. The Uber stopped at 5th and Madison at 9:51 in the morning. James thanked Greg, got out, stewed on the sidewalk. The Apex branch at 1425 5th Avenue was a handsome building. Was glass and stone, clean lines, the logo above the door in brushed silver, understated, deliberate. Inside, through the glass, he could see the marble floors, the teller counters, the low leather chairs in the waiting area. Mother never had leather chairs. She had a sidewalk. He pushed through the door at 9:53. The air inside was cool. climate-controlled to a temperature that said money without saying it. 3 customers is in line. A woman filling out a form at the standing counter near the window. 2 tellers visible at their stations. The branch manager's glass-walled office to the left, door open. No one inside yet. James walked to the end of the line, waited his turn. Ordinary, unhurried, just a man in a white t-shirt moving through a Thursday morning. He noticed things. The way the teller at the far window tracked him from the corner of her eye when he stepped in. The subtle shift in posture, not dramatic, just a degree or two, when he joined the line. The way the room temperature didn't change, but something else did. Felt that months before. He knew exactly what it was. His turn came at 10:07. He stepped to the counter. "Good morning," he said. "I'd like to make a wire transfer, $1 million. And the room did the thing rooms sometimes do. Move. No one gasped. Nothing dramatic. Just a small, almost invisible stillness. The kind that happens when something unexpected enters a space since the space hasn't decided how to receive it. The teller, her name tag read Vanessa, 29 years old, precise eyes, an expression of professional neutrality that was currently doing considerable labor, looked at him. At his shirt, then at his card, which he'd placed on the counter between them. She did not pick up the card. "We'll need to verify your identity first." Of course, he had his ID ready. Set it next to the card. James Caldwell. Vanessa looked at the ID, then at him, not at the screen. At him, behind James, a door opened. Footsteps, the cadence of someone who moves through rooms like they own them, which was interesting, because the room James was standing in was technically his. Problem here. Patricia Sloan, 51 years old, branch manager for 14 years. She'd been hired in August 2010 and had not missed a quarterly performance target since. She was wearing a blazer over a silk blouse, her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, her expression calibrated to convey pleasantness while doing something else entirely underneath. James had encountered many Patricias across 12 years of building Apex. "No problem," he said, "making a transfer from an Apex account?" Patricia looked at the card on the counter, did not touch it. "Standard protocol for large transfers requires additional verification," she said. "We'll need a moment." That's fine. It was not fine. He knew it wasn't, but he needed to see how far this went. Whether he was looking at one person or a pattern. From the neighboring window, a voice through the intercom, male, pitched just slightly loud, carrying just slightly too clearly to be accidental. "Sir, we've had some situations recently. Fraud attempts, people presenting cards that don't belong to them. Derek Sims, 33 years old, 4 years at this branch." The voice of someone who has said something like this before and found it useful. James said nothing, and then Vanessa reached out. Up his card, opened the drawer beneath her window, and locked it. Click. "The card needs to be held for inspection," she said. Looks suspicious. James looked at the drawer, at Vanessa's hand resting on top of it, at the certainty on her face, the face of someone who had done this before and knew, from experience, that most people would simply leave. Would take the smaller version of what they were owed, would accept the indignity because fighting it cost more than swallowing it. Because most people carried somewhere in their body the accumulated memory of all the times they'd pushed back and it had cost them something. "My property in your drawer," James said. "Without a legal basis to do so, Apex reserves the right to. I know what Apex reserves." Quietly, I helped write the policy. Vanessa blinked, just once. A flicker of something behind her eyes gone before it fully formed. "We just need to be careful," she said. "Some people aren't who they claim to be." There it was. Dressed in reasonable language, coded in procedure and protocol, and the vocabulary of due diligence. But there it was, the same verdict he'd received 17 and at 28, and in more rooms than he'd stopped counting. Reached before he'd said a word, before anyone had looked at a screen, not a question, a conclusion. 3 windows to the left, a young woman named Wren Holloway had stopped typing. 26 years old, 2 years at this branch, brown hair in a low bun, the kind of eyes that noticed things other people had learned, professionally, to unnotice. She heard Derek's voice over the intercom, the particular pitch of it, too comfortable, like a sentence he'd rehearsed enough times that it came out smooth. She heard the click of the drawer. She heard Vanessa's tone shift from professional to something harder to name, that register that sounds like process, but is doing something else underneath. Wren looked at her screen, then at the man at window 2, then at Patricia, who had drifted to the edge of the scene with the practiced ease of someone who arranges things, and then prefers to stand just slightly behind them. "This is wrong." Then immediately, "Don't." But it's wrong. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. She could pull up the account right now. Take 45 seconds, that was all. But Patricia was 6 feet away, so Ren waited and watched and kept track of everything. On the opposite side of the lobby, a woman named Bridget Osei stood with a deposit envelope in one hand and her phone in the other. 31 years old, communications consultant. Her family had come from Ghana when she was 4. She'd grown up in Houston, learning to read rooms the way other people learn to read weather, the small shifts in pressure, the drop in temperature that precedes something. She saw it the moment James stepped to the counter, watched Patricia's body language, watched Vanessa's hands, watched Derek lean toward his microphone with a fraction too much confidence. Thumb moved. Record. Shal held the phone low, angled up, not obvious, just steady, because she'd learned, from years of watching moments like this disappear, that you hold them still before they're gone. Back of the line, a man named Tobias Mercer had been mildly annoyed about waiting. 34 years old, freelance journalist, working a series on financial inequality in American cities. A deposit to make and a piece due in 2 hours. He was no longer thinking about his deadline. He was watching the man in the white t-shirt to stand completely still at the counter. Not stiff, not bracing, just still. The way people are still when they've made a decision, and the decision is, I am not going anywhere. Tobias pulled out his phone. Started a live stream. Said nothing to his audience yet. Just let the camera sit and record what it saw. Patricia reappeared at Vanessa's shoulder. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we complete our process. Other customers are waiting. I'm a customer, James said. You're holding up the line. I'm holding up the line, he repeated, not arguing, just marking it. His voice was level, the voice of someone who understood that the moment you raise it, you've handed something over. I'd like to wait in the seating area. I'd like my card back. When verification is. My card, he said again. Now, Patricia's smile held its shape, technically, but something behind it recalibrated, because he hadn't left, and that was a problem she hadn't fully prepared for. Derek's voice through the intercom again, too loud, broadcasting across the entire lobby. Final notice, sir. If you don't step back from the counter, we'll need to escalate this to law enforcement. A woman near the door looked up sharply. A man in line took a half-step back. An older gentleman caught James's eye and then deliberately looked away. Bridget's thumb pressed harder against the back of her phone. Tobias said quietly into his live stream, "You're watching this happen at the Apex Bank on 5th Avenue in downtown Seattle." Editorializing, just watch. James reached into his pocket, took out his phone, dialed. "Deanna," he said, "activate." And Deanna's voice came through the speaker, clear, composed, carrying the kind of authority that sounded nothing like what Vanessa and Patricia had been expecting to hear today. Activation confirmed. All audio and visual is being captured and timestamped in real time with legal preservation standards. Board authorization is on standby. You're fully documented, James. The lobby went very quiet. Not the quiet of relief. The quiet of a room that has just understood something new about its situation. Patricia's hand, which had been moving toward the phone on the counter, stopped. Vanessa's expression recalculated, visibly. The way a face moves when the calculation it was running turns out to be wrong. Behind his partition, went still. And into that quiet, Patricia Sloan made a choice. She pressed the button beneath her counter. Internal alert, possible fraud, escalate. Then she turned to Derek. If he doesn't leave in the next 60 seconds, call it in. James looked at her. I'm not leaving, he said. This is my bank. Patricia's expression arranged itself to something that resembled patience. Everyone's bank, sir. That's rather the point. And something about that sentence, its politeness, its precision, the way it managed to be both reasonable and dismissive in the same breath, settled into James's chest like a stone dropped into still water. He'd heard that sentence before. Different rooms, different decades, different people delivering it, but the same sentence underneath, the same meaning, folded into courteous language. You are welcome here as long as you don't insist on belonging here. He had been hearing it for 30 years. The photograph folded in his front pocket. He could feel it there, the slight weight of the paper, and then back at Patricia. Because that was the thing they had never understood in all the rooms, all the years. He was very good at waiting. Sighed at approximately 10:20 in the morning, about 25 minutes after James had walked the door. A woman arrived at the branch entrance and stopped. 67 years old, silver hair, blue coat, her good coat, the one she reserved for days that required something of her. She looked through the glass at the lobby, at the stillness inside that didn't look like ordinary bank stillness, at the phones being held in ways that phones aren't usually held in banks. The man at the counter, who was not moving. She sat down on the bench by the entrance, took her savings book from her purse, held it in both hands on her lap. Dorothy Wills had not planned to come today. She had planned to come next week, when she thought enough time would have passed after her last attempt that the humiliation of it would feel smaller. But she had woken up this morning and thought, no, not next week, today, because the money was hers, because she was 67 years old and she was tired of waiting for the right time to claim what was already hers. She didn't know what was happening inside, but she recognized something in the posture of the man at the counter, the absolute stillness of someone who has decided not to move. She had worn that posture herself. She held her savings book a little tighter and waited. Derek's hand came down on James Caldwell's arm. Gripping, not dragging, as just resting there with intention, the way a hand rests when it wants to communicate something without being fully accountable for communicating it. Firm enough to mean something, deniable enough to mean nothing if it came to that. James looked at the hand. Derek said nothing, because sometimes silence is the loudest available instrument, and James Caldwell had learned, across 12 years of boardrooms and negotiations and rooms that did not want him in them, exactly when to use it. Derek felt it, the silence turning toward him, the weight of it, the way Tobias Mercer's phone was pointed directly at his hand on James's arm. The way Bridget O'Seas had stopped pretending to hold her phone at hip level and was now holding it at eye level, steady, deliberate, the way a person sees up something they intend to keep. Derek's hand dropped, not because Patricia told him to. She hadn't. She was watching him with an expression that expected compliance, not hesitation. He dropped his hand because something in his chest had quietly, without announcement, made a decision that the rest of him hadn't caught up with yet. Patricia noticed, the way she noticed everything on her floor, cataloged it, filed it, determined what to do with it. Crack in Derek's reliability. Small, but she saw it. Her voice was a closed door. Back to your station. Took a step, not toward his station, just a step, away from James, away from the counter. He ended up standing in the middle of the lobby, between the teller line and the front door, like a man who had been walking somewhere specific and forgotten the destination. And James turned to look at him, not with anger, not with the satisfaction of watching someone flinch, just looked. The way you look at someone when you want them to understand that you see them clearly, not the version they're presenting. Actual person underneath it. Derek looked back, and something in that exchange, wordless 10 seconds, in the middle of a marble-floored bank lobby on a Thursday morning, began a process Derek Sims that would not finish for another 20 minutes, but had already quietly started. Tricia was talking. She was extraordinarily good at talking. 14 years of managing this branch had refined her into someone who could fill a room with the sound of some reason while doing something else entirely underneath it. She addressed the lobby now, not James specifically, but the lobby, the customers, the air itself, with the authority of someone who had never, in 14 years, been made to feel uncertain on this floor. Want everyone to understand that we are following standard Apex protocol. Verification procedures for large transactions exist to protect our customers. Is not unusual. This is not Patricia. One word. James, quiet as a hand placed flat on a table. Looked at a single screen, James said. Not one member of your staff has run a verification step. What has happened in the past 17 minutes is that a bike has been confiscated. A public accusation was broadcast over your intercom system, and a member of your staff placed his hands on my person. Paused. Let it land. Those are not protocol steps. Patricia's chin lifted, just slightly. The chin of someone who has not, in 14 years, been spoken to in this register on her floor. Every right, too. Your very specific rights, James said. I know what they are. I wrote some of them. The lobby absorbed that. Tobias Mercer's viewer count, he could see it in the corner of his screen, was climbing faster than he could track. 4,000, 6,000, the number moving the way a thing moves when it hits a current. Vanessa Croft had not moved from her window. She was standing exactly where she'd been standing when she locked the card in the drawer. Her hand was no longer on top of the drawer. She'd had lowered it to her side, but the drawer was still locked, the small silver key still in the lock, which meant the card was still technically accessible, which meant she had not yet committed to the full weight of what she'd done. She was thinking about this, not in a precise way, more like her body was thinking without consulting her mind. Because here is what the lobby did not know about Vanessa Croft. What this story requires you to understand. She had grown up in West Baltimore. Same city as James Caldwell, though they'd never crossed paths. Different neighborhoods, different schools, but the same city, which had the same particular set of unwritten instructions that about how the world worked and how you survived inside it. She had watched her mother get passed over, had watched her uncle wait in offices while other people were called first. Grown up understanding, in the way you understand things you absorb rather than learn, that certain rooms came with invisible terms of entry that applied only to people who looked like her. And she had made a choice, not consciously, not all at once, but over years, in small increments. She had learned the rules of the spaces she wanted to move through, and she had learned them well enough to use them. Become someone's those spaces found legible, trustworthy, professional, someone's who did not cause complications. She was not unkind. Was the complicated part. In her life outside this building, with her family, her friends, the community gardens, the cell she volunteered at on Saturday mornings, Vanessa Croft was warm and perceptive and fiercely protective of the people she loved. But she had learned to keep that person separate from the person who came to work. And at work, she had slowly, almost without noticing, absorbed the rhythms of Patricia Sloane's branch. The shorthand, the unspoken criteria, the way certain accounts got extra attention and certain customers got extra patience, certain others got what she had just given James Caldwell. Cousins who had been treated the way she'd just treated him. She knew what it felt like from the other side. She just hadn't looked at that knowledge directly in a long time. She had developed the habit of keeping it at the periphery, looking adjacent to it rather than straight at it, and James Caldwell's question, still hanging in the air where he'd left it, unhurried, not demanding an immediate answer, was making her look at it directly for the first time in longer than she could comfortably measure. The person standing in front of you today was your father, your brother, your closest friend, and they were treated the way you just treated this man. What would you feel? Vanessa knew the answer, had known it the moment the words left his mouth. The answer was not complicated. It was not something she had to search for. She just hadn't been ready to do anything with it. She looked at the drawer, at the small silver key. She looked at Wren Holloway, who had walked out from behind her counter and was standing in the middle of the lobby floor with her arms at her sides and her chin level. She looked at James, and the key was still in the lock. Wren Holloway had made her decision 40 seconds earlier, while Patricia was talking and Derek was standing in the middle of the floor and the lobbies was suspended in that particular held-breath quality of a room waiting to find out what happens next. She had gone to her screen, pulled up the account tied to the name on the card in Vanessa's locked drawer. The account nobody else in this branch had looked at this morning. The account that was the entire basis of everything that had happened in the past 17 minutes, and which, in 17 minutes, no one had bothered to check. The results came back in 11 seconds. Platinum executive account, current balance, north of $340 million. Private service designation, CEO level flag, direct escalation pathway to executive compliance. Wren read it once, read it again. With it for 3 seconds. Then she thought about her mother, who taught 4th grade in Oregon for 31 years and who had told her when she was 9 years old and terrified of getting a math problem wrong in front of the class, "Wrong is survivable, Wren. Silent is not." She got up from her station, walked out from behind the counter, stood in the middle of the lobby floor. Said in a voice that was not loud but was completely clear, "Stop." Derek stopped. Patricia turned. Vanessa looked up. Every customer in the line turned toward her. "I ran the account verification," Wren said. "That's the first step in our protocol. In the training manual, it takes under a minute. I just did it from my station right now." She didn't look at Patricia when she said the next part. She looked at the room. The account is real. The balance is real. There is no fraud indicator anywhere in this file. 1. The lobby held its breath differently now. Not that tight anticipatory breath of before. Something wider, more open. Like a room that has been waiting for a specific thing to be said and has just heard it. "We locked a customer's card without looking at his account," Wren continued. "We made a public announcement over the intercom, accusing him of fraud without looking at his account. We threatened him with law enforcement without looking at his account." She finally looked at Patricia. Those things happened in that order. Before anyone looked at a screen, Patricia's voice dropped. Private, meant for Wren alone, though in a room this quiet private was a relative concept. "You are making a significant error in judgment." Wren looked at her. "I looked at a screen. That's not an error. That's the job." A sound moved through the lobby. A gasp, not quite a laugh. Something between, the sound of a room that has been holding itself in one shape and just released. Bridget Osei, who had been recording steadily from across the lobby, lowered her phone slightly and looked at this 26-year-old woman who had just done the only thing that any employee in this building could have done at any point in the past 17 minutes. The only thing that required no courage at all, technically, just a willingness to look at a screen. And the room had needed Ren to make it feel like courage, because everyone else had been pretending the screen wasn't there. Tobias said quietly into his live stream, "The youngest person in this building is the only one who looked at the account." He said nothing else for a moment. He didn't need to. Patricia tried to recover. She was good at recovering. 14 years of managing a branch that performed, that produced clean numbers, that generated no regional-level complications, that ran with the frictionless efficiency of a machine calibrated to produce exactly what was expected of it, had made her very good at recovering. Reframing, at finding the narrative that let the current situation continue without requiring her to acknowledge what the current situation actually was. Accessed a customer's account without authorization, she said. That is a protocol violation. We'll be addressing that privately. She had authorization, James said. Verification of a disputed transaction is specifically outlined in Section 4 of the Customer Service Manual, the manual I wrote. Looked at her evenly. Try again. Patricia looked at him for the first time this morning, looked at him without the buffer of professional authority between them. The certainty that she was on home ground and he was not, and Derek Sims said from the middle of the lobby, "Muse." Sloan, Patricia turned. Derek was still standing in that in-between place, not at his station, not at the door. Hands were at his sides. His jaw was set in the way of someone who has decided something and is mildly surprised to find themselves already on the other side of it. "I needs to say something," he said. "On the record. Derek, you have a list." The lobby went very still. Gradual quiet, an immediate one, the kind that happens when a word lands and changes the air quality of a room. "You call it selective screening," Derek said. His voice was not steady, but it kept moving forward, is what mattered. Said it directly. You said things like, take extra times with certain accounts. If they get frustrated, escalate it. Make sure we're being thorough. You used words like thorough and careful and appropriate caution. He paused. But we all understood what those words meant. In context, branch. With the customers you were describing when you used them, a woman in line made a sound. One customer reached for his phone. Another, who had been sitting in the leather chair by the window reading something on his tablet, simply put the tablet down. Tobias did not say anything into his live stream. Just let the camera run. "Derek," Patricia said, and her voice had shed its pleasantness now. What was left was something older and harder. "You are going to regret this." "I already regret it," Derek said. "I've been regretting parts of it for about 2 years. He looked at James. Defiantly, not with the performance of bravery, just directly, like someone finally making eye contact with something they'd been walking around for a long time. "I followed instructions I should have questioned. I said things I shouldn't have said. I did what I just did to you at that counter." The breath. "I'm sorry, I know that's not enough. I know exactly how insufficient that is, but I need to say it out loud." James looked at him for a long moment. "I know," he said. "Keep going." Derek looked back at Patricia. That she had a verbal protocol, not written down anywhere, nothing in any system, but consistent, applied to specific customers, and when those customers complained, and some of them did, they filled out forms. They called the service line. The complaints didn't go anywhere. Because Miss Sloan managed the follow-up queue, Bridget said from across the lobby. She buried the complaints, not a question. Derek nodded. "It's the ones that came through the branch-level system." "Yes." Patricia's face had cycled through several expressions: outrage, contempt, the look of someone calculating the fastest route to a defensible position, and had settled finally into something that resembled stillness, but was actually the face of someone who has run out of immediate options and is buying time. "Lying," she said. "He's trying to protect himself at my expense." "I'm not," Derek said, "and you know I'm not." Tobias read from his live stream, quietly, like someone translating in real time. People are writing in. Someone named Reginald says his home equity loan application was delayed at this 3 times without explanation, then denied. A woman, she doesn't give her name, says she was asked to produce her birth certificate to verify a joint account she'd held for 8 years. Someone else says they came in to open a college savings fund for their grandchild, and were told the minimum balance requirement had changed. He looked up from the screen. "These comments are coming in on a stream that has been running for less than 30 minutes, he said. That context to be clear. Robert Chase's voice joined the call, board member, monitoring remotely, his tone the measured calm of someone who has reached a decision. James, we've reviewed everything. The board is in full agreement. You have authorization to proceed under executive authority, effective immediately. James looked at Patricia, at Derek still on the lobby floor, at Ren standing 6 feet away, arms at her sides. The photograph on the counter, and then he said, in a voice that was not raised, not performed, not theatrical in any way, I am James Caldwell, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Financial Group. I hold 38% of this company's equity. I own this building. He paused. For effect, because some things need a moment of air around them before the next thing is said. And I came here today as a customer. 3 weeks ago, a woman named Dorothy Wills posted something online about her experience at this. She came to access her pension from an account she has held here for 11 years. She was asked to prove the account was hers. She waited, and then she went home. He looked at the lobby, at all of it, the customers, the phones, the dark quality that had settled into the room. Came here because of her, not because of me. Diana's voice through his phone, James. The video posted from the branch has crossed 400,000 views. Seattle Times and 3 network affiliates are requesting comment. Robert Chase is on the line, and Dorothy Wills arrived outside approximately 15 minutes ago. She's sitting on the bench at the entrance. James turned, looked through the front glass, blue coat, silver hair, a savings book in both hands. She had been sitting there for 15 minutes, while all of this was happening 10 feet away on the other side of the glass. He had come back. She had put on her good coat and come back. James closed his eyes. 1 second. 1. Open them. Open the door for her, he said. Please. Vanessa Croft moved before anyone else did. She stepped out from behind her window, reached into the drawer first, retrieved James's card, placed it on the counter in front of him with both hands, carefully, deliberately, like returning something that had never been hers to take, and then she crossed the lobby to the entrance. She did not look at Patricia when she passed her. She pushed through the door, stepped outside into the September morning, walked to the bench where Dorothy was sitting and crouched down so they were at the same level. Mrs. Wills, she said. My name is Vanessa. I work here. A pause, because the next part needed to be said correctly. I'd like to help you come inside if you're willing. Dorothy looked at her, at the hand Vanessa extended, at the lobby through the glass. What's happening in there? Dorothy asked. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Something that should have happened a long time ago, she said. Because Dorothy deserved more than a careful answer. The man at the counter, he owns this bank, and he came in today like anyone else would come in. To see what it was actually like. She held Dorothy's gaze. Now everyone knows. Dorothy looked at Vanessa for a long time. Expression on her face. Not the practiced efficiency of the teller at window 2. Not the professional neutrality she had worn all morning like a second uniform. Something else was there now. Something that looked, around the edges, like a person who has just put something heavy and is still feeling the difference in her hands. Dorothy took the offered hand, stood up, straightened her coat, and walked through the door. The lobby, all of it, the marble and the dark screens, and the customers who had become witnesses and the phone still running, went quieter than it had been all morning. The tight quiet of confrontation. A different quality, the quiet of something landing, of a room recognizing, without being told what it was looking at. Dorothy Wills crossed the lobby floor, and every person in that room watched her, because they understood, all of them, in whatever way was available to them, that they were looking at the reason. Not the anger, not the viral video, not the terminations that were coming. The reason underneath all of it, a 67-year-old woman in a blue coat who had come back to try again. James stepped forward when she reached the center of the lobby. He was taller than she'd expected. She made the small adjustment of someone accounting for the actual shins of a person she'd only imagined before. Held his hand. She took it. Mrs. Wills. I'm James Caldwell. Dorothy looked at him, at the photograph on the counter behind him. Savings book in her own hand. The young woman outside told me who you are, she said. I'm sorry for what happened to you here, James said. I'm sorry you came to access your own money and were made to feel like you had done something wrong. It took this long for someone to do something about it. Dorothy looked at him with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who has lived long enough to distinguish between an apology forming itself and one carrying actual weight. Toast was carrying weight. I posted that thing online, she said, because I was sitting at my kitchen table the next day, and I started wondering if maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I should have just accepted it and moved on. She looked at him steadily. I know what I experienced. But when you're told in 100 small ways that your read of a situation is wrong, it works on you. Even when you know better. You didn't misread anything, James said. I know that, she said. Firm, I just needed someone else to know it too. They know now. Dorothy glanced at the phones, at Tobias, at Bridget, at the customers still in the lobby. All those screens that had been pointing at this room and this morning. I suppose they do, she said. She looked at Vanessa, who had come to stand nearby. You said you could help me. Yes, ma'am, Vanessa said. Let's do that. Vanessa went to her station. She pulled up Dorothy's account, moving quickly now with the focus of someone who knows what she needs to do and how much time she has to do it. She could see in the corner of the screen the system warning, administrative lockdown initiating in approximately 90 seconds. She ran the verification. Confirmed the account. Confirmed the withdrawal amount. Printed the transaction authorization. The system logged her out while she was entering the final confirmation. The transactions had already processed. She had made sure of that first. She handed the printed authorization to Wren, who completed the cash disbursement with paper forms, the backup process that existed for exactly like situation, which Wren knew about because she had read the operations manual when she started, which was apparently not something everyone did. Wren counted the bills out in front of Dorothy, clearly, carefully. Dorothy took them, counted them herself, slowly, with the attention of someone for whom this money represented 43 years of work. Folded them, put them in her purse, put the receipt next to them, closed the clasp, looked at Wren. Thank you, she said. Course, Wren said, the most ordinary exchange in the world, and the lobby sat with the ordinariness of it. Fact that a woman receiving her own money without having to defend her right to it was the entire morning had been made of. James spoke then, to the room, to the lobby, to the cameras and the people behind them. Patricia Sloan, Derek Sims. Croft. He said the names without heat, without satisfaction. Effective immediately, your employment with Apex Financial Group is terminated. Documented violation of service policy, discriminatory conduct on record. In the case of Miss Sloan, a pattern of complaint suppression that will be addressed through a separate proceeding. Derek, Mr. Sims's disclosure today has been noted. It doesn't reverse the termination, but it will be reflected in how this moves forward. Patricia opened her mouth. Diana, James said, please proceed. Diana processing. Digital credentials revoked for Patricia Sloan, Derek Sims, and Vanessa Croft, effective this moment. HR and regional compliance notified. Branch operations in lockdown. The screens behind the teller stations went dark, one after another. Patricia walked to the door of the back office. 14 years of walking toward that door when things needed handling away from the lobby. The handle didn't move. She stood there with her hand on the door that had, 20 seconds ago, been hers. Derek, still on the floor, didn't look up. Vanessa stood at her dark station. She put both palms flat on the counter. Took one breath, then another. She did not look at Patricia. She did not look at Derek. She looked at the space in front of her, the counter she had stood behind for 3 years, the drawer she had locked this morning, the screen that was now dark. She had grown up knowing exactly what it felt like to be looked at the way she had looked at James Caldwell this morning. She had spent 3 years not letting herself look at that knowledge directly. She looked at it now, and she understood that the weight of it was not going to leave when she walked out of this building. She would carry it, not as punishment, she wasn't interested in that kind of accounting, but as information, as the specific, clarifying knowledge of what it costs to be on the strong side of a decision you had the power to make differently. She straightened up, picked up her bag from under the counter, and walked toward the exit. She didn't speak to Patricia. She didn't speak to Derek. At the door, she paused, looked back at Wren, who was still standing at Dorothy's side. Wren looked at her. No forgiveness in it, no condemnation either. Just the acknowledgement of two people who had been in the same room during the same morning and would carry it in different ways. But Vanessa, not once, walked out. Dorothy Wills walked out of the Apex branch at 1425 Fifth Avenue at 11:24 in the morning. She did not look back. She walked to the corner, waited for the light, crossed the street, sat down on the bus stop bench with her purse in her lap and her savings bus inside it and the receipt folded next to the bills. She sat for a while, not because she was waiting for the bus, not yet, because she needed a moment that belonged only to her. A moment outside of other people's stories, outside of cameras and documentation, and the particular weight of having been witnessed through other people's screens. She looked at her hands. 43 years of work, taxes paid with receipts kept, accounts maintained with the careful attention of someone who understood that her financial security was not something anyone else would protect on her behalf. These hands had done everything right, and for 3 months, doing everything right had not been enough to access what those hands had earned. Dorothy exhaled slowly. She set it down, not the memory. She would keep that, because it was true and it had happened, and the truth of it deserved to be kept, but the weight of it, accumulated heaviness of having been looked at and found insufficient before anyone looked closely. She set that down on the bench beside her. Let the September morning be ordinary again. The bus came 14 minutes later. She got on. She went home. Brand-sided. The lobby had changed quality. The confrontation was over, but the room hadn't entirely processed that yet. Customers who had stayed, and most of them had, which said something about what the morning had meant to people who had come in to do ordinary banking and found themselves inside something's larger, were quiet in the way people are quiet after something significant has landed, and they are still deciding how to hold it. Tobias Mercer was writing in his notes app. Real notes now, not live stream commentary. The journalist part of him, which had been running in parallel to the witness part all morning, was assembling itself into something he would spend 4 days shaping into an article. It would run in 3 publications. The reader mail it generated, more than anything he'd written in 8 years, would be almost entirely from people saying some version of the same thing. This happened to me. That branch. Somewhere. And I thought I was the only one. He would read every letter. Bridget Osei had lowered her phone and was sitting in one of the leather chairs near the window, looking at anything in particular, doing the internal settling that comes after you've held your body in sustained readiness for 2 hours and the readiness has finally been released. The video she'd started recording on instinct was somewhere beyond her control now. She understood that, had worked in communications long enough to know that once something's a current, you can't manage where it goes, only whether what you sent into it was true. It was true. She had recorded exactly what happened. Nothing shaped, nothing framed to look like more than it was. She opened her camera roll. The original clip sat there, unedited 53 minutes of a Thursday morning in September. She would keep it backed up in 3 places for the rest of her life, not as a monument, just because it had happened and she had been there, and sometimes the most useful thing you can do in a moment is refuse to look away from it. She put her phone in her bag, stood up, walked to where Wren was standing near the counter. "Is there anything you need?" she asked. Wren looked at her, a little surprised by the question, which itself said something about the morning. "No," Wren said. "No, thank you." Bridget nodded, picked up her deposit envelope, the one she'd carried in 2 hours ago, to make a routine transaction. Found a teller returning cautiously to their station from the back, made the deposit, collected the receipt, walked out into the September morning. Block from the branch, she stopped, took out her phone, opened the app, 412,000 views. She put the phone away and kept walking, because you witness something, and then the city continues, and you continue with it, and that is not a failure of feeling. Is simply how ordinary life holds the things that happen inside it. Back inside Wren Holloway stood at her station. The system was locked, nothing to log into. She stood there anyway, in the familiar geography of a space that no longer felt like the same place it had been at 9:52 that morning. Same counter, everything else different. James crossed the lobby toward her. "Wren," she looked up. "You're not losing your job," he said. Opposite. As she absorbed that, what does that mean, exactly? It means I need people who look at screens when everyone around them is looking away. A simple statement of operational fact, not a compliment. There's significant work ahead, starting in this branch, starting today. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why did you come in the way you did?" "The jeans." T-shirt, not a challenge. A genuine question. You own this. You could have walked in any way you chose. James picked up the photograph from the counter, folded it, put it back in his pocket. "Because Dorothy didn't get to choose how she came in," he said. She wore her good coat, she prepared, she did everything correctly, and none of it changed how she was received. He looked around the lobby, at the dark screens, at the remaining customers, at the door through which Patricia and Vanessa had both walked out within the past 15 minutes. I wanted to know what this place actually was on an ordinary morning for an ordinary person, not what its report said it was. Looked at where Patricia's screen had been, now dark. "Now you know," she said. "Now I know," he said. She said, "Just that, the right amount." 3 weeks after the Thursday morning, on a Tuesday, an email arrived in Diana's inbox at 6:47 in the morning. She forwarded it to James without comment. Diana did not forward things without comment unless the content required his complete attention. He had listened about her in 9 years of working together and trusted the signal without needing it explained. He read it at his kitchen counter, same white mug, the October light coming through the window at the angle that meant it was just past 7. Sender identified themselves only as a former regional director of Apex's Pacific Northwest Division, recently retired. They had held the position from 2016 to 2023. They did not give the name, though they offered to in a subsequent conversation if James wanted one. The email was 4 paragraphs long. James read all 4, then read them again. The substance: Patricia Sloan's conduct, the Fifth Avenue branch, had been reported internally twice. The first report came through the regional complaint channel in late 2019. The second arrived in early 2021. Both had been received at the regional director level. Both had been reviewed. Neither had been escalated, because the branch numbers were good, because the branch was stable and consistent and generated no operational disruptions. Opening an investigation into a high-performing branch manager based on customer complaints that the manager herself had characterized as isolated misunderstandings, complaints that came from customers. The regional director's own internal notes, described as high-maintenance accounts, had seemed at the time like more disruption than the numbers warranted. 4th paragraph: I am sorry. I have known since the morning I recognized the branch in the video that I owe you this. 2019, I had enough to act on. I chose not to. In 2021, I had more than enough. I still did not act. People were treated badly for the years between those reports and last month, and part of the reason is that I received documentations of what was happening and decided it was easier not to look at it directly. Is the truth. I'm sorry it took this form to say it. James set his coffee down. Read the 4th paragraph a 3rd time. He opened the internal document management system, the complete record of every piece of communication that had ever crossed his desk, and ran a search. Internal complaint. Branch 1425. 4 seconds. 1 result. Subject line. Internal complaint. Branch 1425 Fifth Avenue. Customer Service Discrimination Report. Received February 14, 2021. Forwarded through 3 organizational levels before reaching his inbox. Status: seen. Action taken. Forwarded to regional compliance for follow-up. Seen it. February 14, 2021. He had opened it. Read enough to understand what it was. A customer complaint, serious in nature, about treatment at a specific branch. And he had forwarded it to the regional compliance office, which meant he had forwarded it to the office of the person who had just him 4 paragraphs explaining that had received exactly this kind of report and done nothing with it. He had forwarded a complaint about Branch 1425 to the regional director, who was sitting on complaints about Branch 1425. Then moved on to the next item in his inbox. He had not followed up, not in the days after. Not when the quarterly reports came in from that branch showing clean numbers. Not when the regional director signed off on another cycle of good performance metrics. He had not asked at any point in the 3.5 years between that email and the morning he walked through the branch door in a white t-shirt whether the customer who filed the complaint had ever received a response. Filed it and moved on. James sat with that for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. The October morning light had moved. Coffee had gone cold. He had built Apex so that his mother would not have to stand outside a door. Nobody would. He had spent 12 years building something he believed in, an institution that was supposed to be different, supposed to mean something beyond quarterly returns. In February of 2021, someone had told through the proper channels, doing everything correctly, that the institution was failing the persons on the other side of the door. And he had forwarded the email and moved on. He was not Patricia Sloan. He had not designed a system of deliberate exclusion. Had not written informal protocols about which customers deserved slower service, had not buried complaints with conscious intent, but he had built an organization smart, large enough that he could receive a signal and not feel personally responsible for verifying whether it reached its destination. Grown comfortable, across 12 years of growth and the accumulating complexity of running something large, with the distance between himself and the daily reality of what his institution was doing in rooms he wasn't in. Distance had cost Dorothy Wills 3 months of waiting. It had cost 66 other people their time, their dignity, and their confidence in the institution they'd trusted. James sat at his kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning in October and understood with a clarity that offered no comfortable way out that the story of what had happened at Branch 1425 was not only Tricia Sloane's story. It was also his. That evening, when the office work was done and the apartment was quiet, he called his mother. But that is the next part of the story. That night, the same Tuesday evening he had found the email 3 weeks after the Thursday, James called his mother. But first, he sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The email from the former regional director was still open on his laptop. 4 paragraphs. He had read the 4th one enough times now that he could have recited it. The sender had watched Bridget Osie's video with the recognition of someone who knew the geography of what they were seeing, who understood from years inside institutions like this one exactly which doors the video was showing and what it cost to stand on the wrong side of them. Already rubbished the Surtor. He found the February 2021 email. Already sat with what that meant. Now he needed his mother. She was 74 years old and lived in Atlanta, in the same neighborhood where she had raised James after his father left, the neighborhood from which she had walked to a bank in September 1987 in her good blue coat and waited 4 hours and come home. She had watched Bridget's video 3 times, she told James later. The first time she was too afraid for him to absorb anything clearly. Second time she was too proud. The third time she finally just watched it. She had not called him after. She had learned across 45 years of being his mother when he needed room and when he needed her voice. The days after the Thursday had felt like room. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake and waiting. "Tell me," she said. So he did. He told her about the morning, the photograph in his pocket, the Uber, the door at 9:53, the 17 minutes before anyone looked at a screen. He told her about Derek on the floor and Vanessa turning the key and Wren saying stop in a voice that wasn't loud but was the only one doing its actual job. He told her about looking through the glass and seeing Dorothy on the bench, holding the savings book, not sure if she was allowed to come closer. He told her about the email that had arrived that morning, about the search, about February 14, 2021. Seeing it, about forwarding it, about not asking what happened next. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Not the quiet of someone searching for words. Eleanor always had words. The quiet of someone choosing between several true things and deciding which one the moment required. "Do you remember," she said finally, "what you told me when you were building Apex? When you used to call me from that first office, the small one on the 3rd floor with the window that faced the parking structure, and the chair that was too short for the desk." He remembered the office, the chair, the calls at 11 at night when the city was quiet and he was still at his desk because there was always more to do and he hadn't yet learned the difference between necessary work and the compulsive kind. "You told me you were building it so nobody would have to stay outside," she said. That was the exact word. "Outside. You said you were building a door that opened for everybody." "I remember. And you did," she said. "Built the door. That part is true, and it matters, and you don't get to erase it just because this happened." Pause. "But James, a door needs someone close enough to see who it's opening for, not from a quarterly report. From an email you forward and don't follow up on. Close, present, asking the questions in the rooms where the answers live." She let that sit. "That's the part that got away from you, not the building, the staying close." He didn't say anything for a moment. "The report," he said, "in 2021. I checked it somewhere and I didn't follow up." "No," she said. She let that be what it was, didn't soften it or find the angle that made it easier to hold. She had raised him to be honest about things, and she was not going to offer him less honesty now because the thing he needed to be honest about was uncomfortable. "Found out," she said. "Some people build something and it fails inside and they never find out because they stopped asking. Out, and you walked back in." A pause, and then quieter, with something in it that was not quite amusement, but lived in that neighborhood, in a white t-shirt. He almost laughed. "In a white t-shirt," he said. "That's my son," she said. "Now, what are you going to do about it?" He told her, all of it, the 67 letters he was going to write, the meetings he was going to request, the structural changes he was going to build into the complaint infrastructure so that a report could never again travel from a customer's hands to a regional director's desk and simply disappear. Direct reporting channel that would bypass the layers where things had been getting lost. The regional accountability review. Wren in the new role he was already designing. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The girl who looked at the screen," she said. "Take care of her," Eleanor said. People who look when everyone else has decided not to. They don't always get to keep doing that. Make sure she can keep doing it. That's what the program is for, James said. Good, she said. Then build it like you mean it this time. He said, good night. Sat for a moment longer in the quiet kitchen. Cold coffee, closed laptop, October night outside the window. He got up, poured the coffee down the drain, rinsed the mug, went to sleep because his mother had told him to. In the morning, he started. He did not hold a press conference. He did not return calls from the Seattle Times or the network affiliates or any of the organizations that wanted to put a frame around what had happened and file it away as a story with a clean ending. Watched institutions respond to public accountability by reaching immediately for the narrative that made them look like they had already fixed the problem. It was not going to do that because the problem was not fixed. It had been named, which was different. Necessary, but different. So instead of a press conference, he asked Diana to find all 67 people. The full audit took 4 days. Across 14 branches, 67 complaints had been filed through proper channels between 2018 and September 2024. Each had received an automated acknowledgement. Each had been routed to regional oversight. Each had, at some point in that routing, been quietly removed from the active follow-up queue, logged as handled, set aside, never substantively addressed. James wrote 67 letters, not with legal in the room, not with PR reviewing drafts for liability exposure. He sat at the kitchen table and wrote each one himself. 11 days. Each letter said the same essential thing in different words. What happened to you was real. I am sorry, not as a legal position, but as the person who built this institution and did not tend it carefully enough. He signed everyone by hand. Arthur lived in the Central District, retired school teacher, 20 years old, 31 years of English classes that showed in everything about how he listened. His kitchen had books on 2 of the 4 chairs and a mug of red pens on the windowsill. He cleared papers from the table without apology when James arrived and made coffee that took a few minutes and was worth the wait. Filed that complaint in March of 2020, Arthur said. 4 years ago, I was asked to verify my identity 4 times during a single visit. Each time by a different staff member as though they were each encountering me for the first time. He turned his mug slowly on the table. I asked to speak with the manager. Patricia Sloan told me she would look into my concerns. She did not. No, James said. She didn't. I know that now. I want to ask you something directly, Arthur said. Kind of change that gets announced and photographed and then quietly doesn't happen, or the kind that makes things actually different for the next person who walks through that door? I want it to be the second kind, James said. I can't promise you it will be, because promises close that gap for no one. What I can do is tell you what I'm changing, specifically, and you can tell me whether it's enough. Then tell me, Arthur said. So James told him, the reporting channel, the audit, the structural changes to regional oversight, the pilot at 5th Avenue. Arthur asked 4 questions, each targeted a different part of the structure, got 4 direct answers. All right, Arthur said. Come back in a year and tell me what it actually looks like then. I will, James said. He put it in his calendar before he left the driveway. Dorothy chose a diner 2 blocks from her apartment. She was already in a booth when James arrived, coffee in front of her, a piece of pie she'd ordered while she waited. She was wearing the green coat, the practical one, the waterproof one, not the blue one, the coat for ordinary days, which was its own kind of statement. I don't need an apology, she said when James sat down. I've set that down. What I need to understand is what happens to the next person, the one who walks into your branch next month without whatever combination of circumstances made her complaint land where it did. What does her morning look like? So James told her. All of it. Dorothy listened the way she had listened in the lobby, completely, without restlessness. 3 questions, got 3 direct answers. One more thing, she said. Yes, Wren. She's leading the accountability team,
James said.
Of frontline accountability. Started 3 weeks ago. Dorothy set her fork down with the deliberateness of someone who has received the correct answer to a question that mattered. Good, she said. She looked at me like I was a person, not a problem, not an inconvenience. She came outside, crouched down, so we were at the same level. She looked at James steadily. You can build all the programs you want. What you need is people who see people. Install that. You can only hire for it and protect it once you find it. I know, James said. The hardest part. It is, Dorothy said, because you can't mandate it. It either grows in a place or it doesn't. In the easy quiet of the diner for a while, your mother, Dorothy said, the photograph, the blue coat. James looked at her. I wore mine today, Dorothy said, glancing at the green coat on the hook at the end of the booth. Not the same coat, but I wore one. Because today was worth wearing a coat for. She stood up, buttoned it, extended her hand. Thank you for coming back, James said. Thank you for giving me a reason to, she said. And she walked out into the October morning. 4 weeks after the meetings concluded, Wren Holloway carried a box up one flight of stairs to a converted storage room at Apex headquarters. Window facing the parking structure, desk slightly too large for the space. James had offered her a fourth-floor office with a view of the water. She had declined it. I want to be close to the people using the channel, she said, not above them. Unpacked the box, a coffee mug, a notebook, 3 pens, a photograph of her mother outside the school where she had taught for 29 years. She positioned it so it was visible from her chair, but not facing the door. Not for visitors, for her. She spent her first 4 days reading all 67 buried complaints completely, without looking for the version easiest to act on. By the end of the 4th day, she'd identified 32 cases where the customer had received no response whatsoever. On the 5th day, she picked up the phone. The first call was to Rosalind, 61 years old. 2 years ago, a branch in Bellevue had told her the balance her account was insufficient for her withdrawal. A false, verifiably false, something 11 seconds on a screen would have confirmed. She had waited 40 minutes, filed a complaint that afternoon, received an automated acknowledgement, heard nothing since. When Wren introduced herself, Rosalind went quiet. Someone actually called, she said, half to herself. The way you say something, you've been expecting one fun thing for 2 years, and something entirely different just happened. I read your complaint, Wren said. All of it, and I'm sorry it took this long. The call lasted 42 minutes. Wren took notes on everything, the original incident, what Rosalind had needed when she filed, what she had given up hoping for, and what resolution meant now, 2 years later. Because resolution looked different depending on when you arrived at it. She hung up, sat with the weight of the call for a moment, not long, just enough. Picked up the phone and dialed the next number on the list. The Frontline Accountability Program launched on a Tuesday in November. No press photos, just an internal memo, 3 pages, sent to every Apex branch and regional office on a Tuesday morning when most people were already at their desks with coffee going cold beside their keyboards. The memo said what it meant and did not pad itself. Frontline employees had a direct reporting channel to the Executive Compliance Office. Meant direct, bypassing branch management, bypassing regional directors, reaching a named person who would pick up within 24 hours. Every complaint received would get a case number, a reviewer, and a substantive response within 30 days, not an automated acknowledgement. Actual answer about what was found and what was being done. Retaliation against any employee who used the channel meant immediate termination. Not a warning, termination. Below the policy language, one additional paragraph that James had written himself and which legal had reviewed but not softened. The risks exists because 67 customers told us something was wrong and we did not respond. Is a specific failure with specific causes, and we are addressing those causes structurally. But the deeper failure was simpler. People in this organization stopped asking what was actually happening in the rooms they were responsible for. Program is one mechanism for fixing that. The other mechanism is each of you deciding every morning that looking at the screen is worth the 30 seconds it takes. 6 weeks earlier, the Fifth Avenue branch had quietly reopened under new management. The program's framework had been running there already as a pilot. Carla's idea, offered in her second conversation with James after her appointment. Run it here first, before it goes everywhere, so we know what breaks before we've committed it to the whole network. James had agreed without hesitation. That was exactly the kind of thinking he needed in the rooms he wasn't in. The Eleanor Caldwell Scholarship launched the same month as the program. Eleanor had said absolutely not when James proposed naming it after her. Said she had stood outside a door in 1987 and raised a son who spent 12 years trying to make sure no one else ever had to. It was not how scholarships worked. He said it was how this one worked. A long silence on the line. Fine then. 20 minutes later, a callback. If you're doing it, do it right. Full tuition, a mentorship structure built around the operational network, not the executive level, the branches. People who ran customer-facing work and made the daily decisions that determined what walking through the door actually felt like. A required rotation at a frontline position during each recipient's studies, because James had decided that no one should make decisions about how institutions work without understanding what those decisions feel like from the other side of the counter. You needed to stand there. You needed to know. 10 students in the first cohort. James met each of them in the conference room with the window that faced the water. Solve opening question. Why finance? The answers ranged across the practical and personal. Stability, family, the desire to understand something that had always been used against the people they loved. One young man said he had spent his life being excluded by systems and believed the only useful response was to get inside the architecture and start taking the walls apart from the inside. James looked at him across the table. Good, he said, and meant it. The Fifth Avenue branch had reopened 6 weeks after the Thursday, on a Monday morning in mid-October. Carla had spent those 6 weeks doing something James had not fully anticipated, interviewing every remaining employee individually, not to audit them formally, but to ask each one a version of the question. What did you know about how this branch operated, and what did you do with that knowledge? Some of those conversations ended in departures. Some produced people who became, in the months that followed, the most reliable members of the rebuilt team. They had been inside a culture doing something wrong. They carried the specific lived knowledge of what that looked like from the inside, what the language sounded like, how the informal protocols moved through a room, what it felt like to understand what was being asked of you and do it anyway. Knowledge, turned in the right direction, was worth more than the clean record of someone who had never been tested. Carla understood this. She had seen enough institutions rebuilt badly to know that clearing the room entirely of everyone connected to what went wrong produced a team with no memory of the failure and therefore no immunity to repeating it. The lobby looked the same. Same positions for the teller stations. Same leather chairs. Same standing counter by the window. Same brushed silver logo above the door, but the light in the room felt different, or the absence of something that had been in the air under Patricia Sloane's management for years, a particular low-level watchfulness that had settled into the space over time and was gone now, leaving the room more open than it had technically become. Near the entrance, a small plaque on the wall, dark wood, clean lettering, no logo, no date, no names. This branch changed. Because it had to. Because someone reminded us what we were supposed to be. On a Wednesday morning in March, 6 months after the Thursday, James Caldwell came back. White t-shirt, faded jeans, a wire transfer to make. He pushed through the door at 10:15. The lobby was doing what a well-run lobby does, moving through ordinary transactions without drama. 3 customers, 2 tellers, both present in their work without performing it. Carla's office visible through the glass partition, door open, pen moving across a page. The teller at the nearest window looked up when James approached. Name tag, Ana, 23 years old, 3 months into the job. In the early phase of a working life where you are learning simultaneously what the role asks of you and what you are willing to ask of yourself. She looked at him, at his t-shirt, at his jeans, and she smiled. The open, ungonzardatsam of spruce who has not developed the habit of sorting the person in front of them before deciding how to receive them. Good morning. How can I help you today? James stood at the counter and registered the absence of something. Absence of the small recalibration, the barely perceptible reassessment that had happened at this same counter 6 months ago, within seconds of him stepping forward. The psychical shift in posture that said, I have already reached a conclusion, and I am going to operate from that conclusion rather than from what you tell me. A person, looking at a person, asking what she could do. Wire transfer, he said, straightforward, card and ID. He put them on the counter. She ran the verification, clean under a minute, the way it ran when it was simply a procedural step it had always been meant to be rather than an instrument for something else. Confirmed the destination account, processed the transfer, slid the confirmation across. All done. Anything else? No, thank you. Of course. Have a good morning. He picked up his card, turned toward the door, stopped at the plaque, read it. He stood there and let the moment be what it was, not reaching toward the next thing yet. Yet he thought about Wren at her desk on the 2nd floor of headquarters. The photograph of her mother positioned to face her chair, not the door. The list of calls still to make, the 42 minutes with Rosalind, the next number on the list. He thought about her declining the office with the water view. Not above them, she had said. He thought about Carla interviewing every remaining employee in the weeks before reopening, asking the hard question, making the hard calls, staying close enough to see what was growing in the space she was responsible for. He thought about Arthur and his kitchen table. Come back in a year and tell me what it actually looks like. Calendar reminder was still set. He was keeping it. He thought about Derek on the lobby floor. The email Derek had sent Diana 3 weeks after the termination, asking whether there was a formal process for what he'd disclosed. Diana had forwarded it with 3 words. Your call, James. He had written back 4, treated as cooperation. The matter was still working through the appropriate channels. Derek had made the call. That had its own weight, separate from everything else. He thought about Vanessa, the card placed back on the counter with both hands carefully. The transaction completed for Dorothy in the seconds before the system locked her out, making sure it processed first, making it the last thing she did in the building. Let's not trend that at the door. Not forgiveness offered, not forgiveness requested. Something more precise. The acknowledgement of 2 people who had been in the same room during the same morning and understood they would carry it differently and in different directions, and that this was as it should be. He thought about Bridget, half a block from the branch, stopping to check a number on her phone, and then putting it away and continuing into the city. Because you witness something, and the city keeps moving, and you move with it. The continuing is not a failure of feeling. What it looks like for an ordinary life to hold something significant and go on. He thought about Patricia's hand on a door that would not open. Thought about Eleanor, September 1987. 4 hours. Walking home, he reached into his pocket, took out the photograph. His mother, 37 years old, blue coat, standing outside a door that would not open. That expression he had studied for 30 years, and funny somewhere in the months between the Thursday and this Wednesday found words for. Anger. It had never been anger. It was the expression of a person in the act of deciding whether to keep knowing what she knew, whether to hold on to the knowledge of her own worth against the pressure of a door that wouldn't open and a building full of people who had decided she didn't qualify. Whether to maintain that knowledge intact when everything in front of her was in instincts, the question was still open, that it was a question at all. She had decided to keep knowing it. She had walked home with it, raised a son with it, passed it to him across 45 years as the most durable thing she had to give. The son had built a door. The door had failed 67 people in documented ways, and more in ways that would never be documented, because those people had learned not to expect that documenting would matter. The son had received a report about the failure in February of 2021 and forwarded it and moved on, which was its own kind of failure. Different in intent, not different in effect for the person on the other side of it. Now the door was being rebuilt by Wren, who looked at a screen when everyone around her had found reasons not to. By Carla, who stayed close enough to the floor to see what was growing and tended it when it went sideways. By Anna, who looked up and smiled without calculating first. By the scholarship students sitting in branches across the city, standing on the customer's tie side of the counter, learning what it felt like from there. By Dorothy, who had gone home and come back. By Arthur, still watching, still waiting for the year mark. Rosalind, who had said someone actually called with the specific quality of someone who had stopped expecting that and was recalibrating in real time. By Eleanor, who had walked home from a door in 1987 and raised someone who built something and kept building it even after I had to look at what it had failed to be. James folded the photograph, put it back in his pocket, turned from the plaque, pushed through the door into the March morning. Cool air, pale light, the city moving the way it moved, continuous, indifferent to the specific weight of any particular Wednesday, holding inside it the ordinary transactions of thousands of people who had places to be. He turned toward the office. There was work to do. There was always work to do, and now he was staying close enough to see it.